This week's edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com. Welcome to another edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We are talking today with Kathleen Conway, who is managing editor of Georgia Trend magazine. Good morning, Kathleen.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking a few minutes with us. Uh, so I always like to start with a little bit of just tell me a little bit about what is Georgia Trend and what makes it a little bit unique and different from other publications or other magazines and websites around Georgia.
So Georgia Trend is it covers the entire state. That's one of the things that I find interesting because it's economic projects, it's business, it's sometimes about health, a little bit of politics thrown in there. But they don't just, I mean, there's a lot going on in Atlanta, obviously, in Metro Atlanta, but they also cover, not just Savannah and Macon and Augusta and the other kind of bigger cities. They cover everything. They cover counties that until I started working here, I had not heard of. And what's going on in that county and why it's important to that county and also why it's important to the state to some degree.
And and just so we remind everyone, how many counties does Georgia have?
I think it's 159. Don't put me on
159.
the
That's
spot.
right. That's
Yes.
right. No, you're right. 159 counties. Yeah. I was talking to somebody yesterday and we had that conversation. We think it's one of the states with the most counties, and
Yeah.
some of them are about this big, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I know Brian Kemp, Governor Brian Kemp likes to brag a little bit that a lot of the business that goes on in Georgia is in rural areas. That we've been, Georgia's been named the number one state for business by at least one source, possibly others. I think one of them is Site Selector magazine, calls it the number one state for business. And he says, yes, some 30 to 40% of that is Atlanta and Metro Atlanta, but the rest is rural and outside of Atlanta. So it's, you kind of get to know what's going on throughout the entire state.
Yeah, and there's always that kind of two Georgias conversation, right? There's
Mhm.
Metro Atlanta and then there's the rest of the state. But I think more and more over the decades, the rest of the state has become much more of a economic powerhouse than not more than not necessarily more than Metro Atlanta, but in some ways supplementing and competing with what Atlanta does. I mean, the port of Savannah, right? I mean, that's huge, right?
Huge. Yes,
Yeah,
yes. We
yeah.
always do a story on the port every year. And the woman who did my job before, Marianne Demuth, loves to do that story. She's like, I love the ports. I love writing about the ports. I love interviewing the ports people. So I was, hey, here I am again 1 year later, bugging you to do that story. Um, but it's a
Well,
huge story.
yeah, it's a huge story, and I don't think anybody. I mean, it's hard to. I think it's hard for people to visualize or understand exactly what what all is happening at those ports and what's coming in. And it's when you see it in writing, it's one thing, but sometimes you see it in a TV story once in a while, and like, okay, and even that is hard to encompass it all, right? Because there's so much
Mhm.
happening.
Yeah.
Um, so statewide focus. So if folks are interested in pitching a story, they need to kind of keep that in mind that this is not Atlanta Magazine. It's not
Right.
Business Atlanta Magazine. It's
Right.
Georgia Trend Magazine.
Mhm.
And I imagine you get a lot of those kind of pitches incoming, people saying, "Hey, I want to do the story," and you look at it, it's like, okay, this is too Atlanta specific for
Mhm.
what we want to do.
Yeah. And
No,
sometimes it's just too small. I mean, nothing against the pitch or the person, but it's, this guy at this company got a promotion. And it's like, good for him, but we're talking about broad issues and like trends, Georgia trend. What's going on in agriculture as a trend? What's going on in sustainability as a trend? So, yeah, we rarely cover those just little, this guy is now a VP at his department kind of thing.
unless they're like a really huge company, right? In which case it makes sense, right?
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
we rarely even cover just individuals. It'll be like more about, okay, if this guy works for Hyundai and we're writing about the Meta plant, we can get his angle. He's in Savannah, and then there's a guy over there in Dublin, and then there's someone else here in Atlanta. We can kind of interview all of them for their perspective.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I tell clients also is you have to think about it as kind of that larger story. So unless you're a giant company, Hyundai or Rivian or something, The story is not going
Yeah.
to be just about you, but it's fine. I mean, I've done many stories with many media outlets where you get your client into the story, and by creating that kind of larger trend story, and it makes it a more interesting story for the publication and for the reader than just reading about one particular company. Uh,
Hmm.
but the magazine also does kind of specific features and specific. You kind of have different county features every month, right?
Yes, yes. So some of them we kind of repeat because they're just huge counties that everybody knows about, like Cobb and Gwinnett and Fulton. And then some of them may be every other year or every few years. Um, right now, I'm looking ahead to February. We're doing Cherokee County and Valdosta Lowndes County. Um, and so it's kind of interesting too because we have a writer that's based closer to the south, or southeast. So I'll give her like all those southeastern counties, and then we've got a guy that's southwest, and I'm like, ooh, I'm hitting on, I'm going to get you to do that because you know more of the people, more of what's going on there. Um, and then we have a lot of Atlanta-based people, and they can do anything metro or slightly outside metro, or sometimes they go out of their comfort zone and go, I know nothing about this county, but I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah, and it makes sense to have the someone who lives in the area because they know what to look for.
Yes.
Yeah, as you said, they know the people, they know the companies, but they also know just the geographic landscape of here's what's concerning people, here's what people are worried about, here's why
Hmm.
people in this town are worried about this new data center that's being proposed, that kind of thing. Like that's
Hmm.
kind of one of the big things lately is the influx in data centers, right?
Yeah, we actually just got a letter from the editor, or letter to the editor, I should say, regarding a story we did on Fayette County. And the reporter mentioned the data center and she didn't really, I mean, she was sort of unbiased, like, here's what's happening. It's a big project. And the letter to the editor was like, don't you realize that these are hurting the community? So we don't always get like the average Joe necessarily getting interviewed. We talk to, the economic development department. We talk to the tourism department. We talk to mayors of specific cities, and they may not get, some of them might, but they may not get into, oh, this is kind of a controversial thing. Sometimes they do. If it's super controversial, they'll tell us, but sometimes it's just like a list of projects, and they're kind of talking about it from a economic standpoint, like, hey, it's bringing this much money to our county or this
And,
many
and
jobs.
right, and that becomes a whole different story. It's like, okay, you can mention data centers, car plants, solar facilities, and every one of those is going to have maybe positives and negatives on it, which is a different story. You're talking
Yes,
about here's the economic impact of this and this and this, and
right,
you could go down a rabbit hole of saying, let's talk about all the other factors or
right, yeah,
issues
and
relating to this plant or that plant. But
yeah.
as you said, that's a different story.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
Well,
every
how
so often,
long? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead, sorry. I was just gonna say, every so often we do kind of hit on what might be kind of controversial. So we were doing something about the Okefenokee Swamp, and we mentioned there's a mining project. So well, then we had people talk about it, kind of negatively. So then I'm like, well, now we got to get a quote from the mining company. So they can say, no, this is a great thing. We're bringing jobs. We're not going to hurt we're not going to hurt the swamp. So anyway, yeah, if it does come up organically, then we're like, oh, we got to get the other side. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's that. I guess sometimes that little kind of line between economic development and environmental impact, which, one side, the developers or the company's not necessarily always thinking about that. Although, I guess to be fair, they probably are, but from their perspective of one side, they might not be thinking about it as much as they want them to be thinking about it, right?
Mhm.
And to the other side, the people who are worried about the environmental impacts aren't thinking about the need for economic development or jobs in certain communities and how that can be balanced out.
Yeah.
Um, so I have been reading Georgia Trim for a long, long time, and I will mention to folks that there in every issue there's a kind of a coming up and upcoming issues kind of editorial calendar kind of thing. So if you're looking to see what's going to be happening in the magazine a couple months down the road. It's in every issue. You can find that. It's either a page or a half page every issue, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how far in advance, like if we're looking, if we're in January right now, what issue are you working on right now?
Oh my goodness. So this is the I never really know what month I'm in because obviously it's early January, but we're working on February, March, April, and May. So I'm like assigning May. So which means I'm kind of telling people like, hey, this is what we're going to cover. And then some of them are like, can you be more specific? No, oh shoot, that means I have to like, so yeah, when I have these planning meetings with my team, I write up like, here's what I think we could cover. And sometimes people on the team are like, yeah, we covered that 2 years ago. Because I've been doing this job less than 2 years. So they'll sometimes know more the recent past than I do.
Sure.
Uh, and so then they'll be like, why don't we try this angle? So then we kind of come up with that as a team, the angle that we want to cover. So like that's what I'm telling the May writers now, like, oh, we're gonna do MBA programs. And then she's like, well, which ones and what's the focus? And, so we're kind of working on that. And then in April, that is due at the end of this month. So it's economic yearbook is a huge feature that we cover every April, and it's all the entire state. So we cover it through all the different regions, Northwest, Northeast, West Central, East Central. Um, and so that's a big beast of an issue, but it leaves no stone unturned. And that one is being written. And then for March, I just received a bunch. They were due like this week or technically last week, but it was Christmas. So things started coming in this week. So yeah, it's just, and I'm making folders because I'm like, what's this for? What month is this?
Right. Right.
And it's a juggling act for sure.
And whereas the magazine once upon a time was just entirely print, now you've got an online component too, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
so talk about how that what's the difference between what goes into the magazine versus what is on the website and or both?
Um, yeah, it's very similar. The website, so it's different too. There's two ways to read it on the website. You can actually like click on the icon that looks like the cover of the magazine, and it looks exactly like what you're going to see in print. But you can also, if you just want to read like the cover story, you can Google a name, and if it's about, a certain. Last year we did Ed Bastian. So you could just type his name, Google it, and then the story will come up, not necessarily in that form, but just it's large
Yeah.
print kind of.
Right, right. Not
Um,
not in that kind of PDF looks like the
yes,
magazine form, but just like a
exactly. Yeah,
text form. Yeah, right, right, right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then they have Georgia Trend Daily, where I don't work on that so much, but they'll take like snippets of the magazine and they'll take snippets of like what's going on in the news, and they kind of mix it all together and put that on that. So
Yeah,
there's a
and
little bit of
and I have seen the daily kind of pulling from other publications, just kind of things that are statewide of statewide interest, from
yes.
other TV stories or newspaper stories here and there. So it's more of a
Yes.
aggregation of other interesting news of the day that
Yeah.
folks can read. Um, so so if you're working on so you're out as far as May. So if someone has an idea for a story, and obviously, again, look at the editorial calendar, look and see what's on the calendar for May. Does it? I always tell my clients I'd rather be early than late. So, you know, look at May and say, okay, it's January. Hey, I've got something that fits into May. I should start talking to
Right.
Kathleen now.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, yeah, if you wait too long, so sometimes we'll be working like February, we're finishing it up to go to print. So if someone would say, "Oh, I saw you're doing, you're featuring certain cities in February," you're like, "That thing's done. Those we are,
That
we
ship
are,
has sailed.
yeah, yeah." Or, yeah, whatever it is, the counties that we're covering, Cherokee and Valdosta Lowndes, someone might go, "Oh, I have a really good pitch from there." I mean, it's by this point,
You're
unless it's
three or
like
4 months too late.
earth-shattering.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's good to look ahead, and then, also sometimes like they'll see, oh, they're covering women leaders. I'm gonna pitch whatever, but sometimes we have these meetings where we've already chosen like what, five, six, seven leaders we want to cover.
Right.
Now maybe, something scandalous would happen. It would be nice to have it, but it's usually like months in advance.
Yeah, and I know that you guys use a lot of contributing writers, so I'll sometimes look and see who contributes regularly to the publications and kind of pitch both ends, So,
Yeah.
so because as you said, sometimes you'll assign a story to a reporter and then they have to kind of dig up they have to find some sources or whatnot. So if I'm looking ahead and I say, okay, I've got this story and here's a source that might be good. Of course,
Yeah.
I don't know, 4 months ahead of time which of your contributing writers is going to be doing the story. So, so
Well,
sometimes I'll guess.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes you can guess based on region or based on just if you notice certain writers like certain stories.
Right.
Um, and then sometimes, like, I don't always respond to all the pitches, but if I know that, Betty is writing about Savannah and I get a pitch about some new something or other that's going on in Savannah, I might just forward it to her and go, FYI. And maybe she's already covered it. Maybe she's like, that's not a great angle. I'm not going to cover it. I'm not saying you must, but it's just, hey, just in case there's something here that you might want.
Yeah, it's interesting. We work more and more over the last 20 years. We work a lot more with writers who contribute to one or more publications, and sometimes you don't know all of the publications they're writing for. So you
Mm,
might say, "Oh, I'm not gonna talk to Randy Sutherland because he only writes for this publication." But maybe Randy's trying to write for another publication, or maybe he's just picked up something else that he's interested in. So I'll tend to say, okay, here's something new I'm working on. If this fits into something that is on your plate, then let me know. And sometimes half the time I'm like, yeah, not a good fit, and then the other half of the time it's yeah, that might work.
yeah.
Or
Because
or
he also works
it's
on Georgia Grown, which is
right,
our sister magazine.
right.
So if it doesn't work for Georgia Trend, he may say, oh, but it would work on this other
Yeah, he's great.
publication.
I've worked with him for a long time.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is just kind of anticipating. You look at the magazine and say, okay, every year Georgia Trend covers this kind of topic, and you may not see it on the editorial calendar, but you can say, hey, Kathleen, I know in the past, you've covered this industry, construction or sustainability or one of car electric vehicles, that kind of thing. If and when
Hmm.
you get to that, here's a source for you. So I encourage people to be a little more creative about their pitching. Sometimes PR people they'll only pitch something if they think it's going to be a story about just their client.
Hmm.
Like, just you have to think broader, especially with a magazine like Georgia Trend. You got to think broader. It's not likely to be a story just about your client, but if you can get your client into the story, then that's a good thing. I mean, you guys are hitting what, 50,000 subscribers, I think it's the number or something like that.
So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure the magazine I see the magazine all over town in waiting rooms and offices and
Yeah.
whatnot. So there's always that kind of extra pass along number.
Yeah.
We used to say for magazines like Georgia Trend, there were 4 people read every issue was kind of the metric or something like that. So if you said 50,000 subscribers, that means 200,000 people are actually reading it. Well, that's I don't know. Who knows? That's the number we use sometimes.
Yeah, no, you could be right because also like if we cover a particular county or whatever, sometimes we get an email from the, county commissioner, hey, can you send us a copy for the mayor of this, a copy for the county manager, a copy for so then it's kind of okay, we'll spread the word a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and now you've got the digital edition on the website, so it's really easy. I often and I get so
Yes.
I get emails with the digital edition attached to it, and then I get the magazine. So usually by the time the magazine comes, I've already read the digital edition.
Yeah,
But
you're like, I saw it.
so then
Yeah.
I pass it along to somebody else who isn't getting the hard copy of the magazine. All right. So and then of course legislative session. You guys are covering that as
Oh
well.
yeah.
Yeah, is there a
Yes,
particular
that's a big
person? Is that a particular person, or is that kind of the whole team covering that?
It's so we literally show every human that is in the assembly, their party, their where they are, and then like well all the committees they're on. So that one, and as an editor, you're like fine tooth comb, like, oh, he's no longer in the appropriations committee, he's now in the whatever committee. So it's a lot of little teensy weensy things, but we're trying to make it as up to date as possible for readers
Oh
who are
wow.
like, yeah,
So is that
who
where is that on the website somewhere?
that's going to be the February issue.
Okay, that's the issue. Okay, I got you.
Yes, the
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
legislative guide. Yep,
Yeah, I
that
usually
is
go
what
to
we.
the state has a really good, well, pretty good website with the legislative, the movement of bills and who's on the committees and whatnot. So we almost every year we've got some client that's wanted doing something during the legislative session. So we're always looking to see who's on the committee, who's chairing the committee, where's the bill. And sometimes the system is really good about saying, okay, it's in the hopper here, or it's in first gone through first read here, that kind of thing. And but then when you get into the really busy times, the system slows down a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
where's
Oh
the
yeah.
bill? It's coming, it's
Yeah.
coming. We're trying to enter the data in, and
There's
then the
that one
last,
day. It's usually like the end of February, early March, where like this is the last day we're even going to consider these bills, and then it goes back into maybe next year or whatever.
crossover day. Yeah, yeah. If it
Mm.
doesn't make it from one house to another, then it's dead for the year.
Yep.
All right, let's jump to the really hard question. And I always tell folks, so the question is, what's something cool or fun about Kathleen that people might not know about?
Oh gosh, this is where it
And,
gets hard.
and it could be something, it could be a hobby or something you collect or a certain talent, you know, tap dancing,
Um,
water ballet, that.
no talent at all. Um, so gosh, what can I talk about? So for hobbies, I used to kind of play golf, not well, and I used to do Zumba with some frequency. And then about almost 3 years ago now, I was getting on a carnival ride and there was an accident. And I broke my tibial plateau, which people don't maybe even know where that is, but it's the bone that like holds up your knee. So that has like changed my mobility. I mean, I had a knee replacement. I'm getting better, but I'm way more cautious about like anything too physical these days than I
Sure.
used to be. I do intend and want to get back to golf where it literally might be 9 holes and in the cart and
Sure.
but because that I feel like you see people in their 80s playing golf. So maybe I can get back there. But right now with work and then I am raising a 14-year-old son, I feel like there's less time for like, yay, let's
Yeah.
go out on the town.
Give it
Um,
another 2 years, and then the 16-year-old son will be hopefully less work as he disappears with
yeah.
jobs and AP classes and whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that 13, 14-year-old period is yeah, it's a little more
yeah.
hands-on and gotta drive him everywhere. Yeah, all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
so next couple of questions, kind of a lightning round. You don't have to give long answers, but we'll start with the last book you've read or the last podcast you listened to.
So the last book I read is actually a reread. Again, going back to my son, he was reading Night by Elie Wiesel for English class. So I'm like, oh, I read that a million years ago. I'm going to reread it. I swear I feel like it was harder this time around because maybe when you're reading it for school, I was trying to like remember incidents that I might be tested on. But when you're just rereading it, you're like, oh my gosh, this book is so gut-wrenching.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and you got that adult perspective too, right?
yes, yeah, and
Okay.
and because it was written, obviously it was written by an adult, but about when he was a kid during the Holocaust. So you're seeing it like this poor then child and all that he had to endure.
All right. Let's see. Favorite local restaurant.
So I live in Lilburn, and so my favorite local restaurant is called Los Hermanos, Taqueria Los Hermanos, I think. I just call it Los Hermanos. Um, it's Mexican. It's not a chain, but they do have other. Now there's one, I think, in Swanee, and maybe there's one in somewhere in other part of town. Tucker, I think. Um,
Um, Favorite guilty pleasure.
oh my goodness. Reality TV.
All right. Do you have a show you want to admit to?
I watched the Housewives, which is like horrible. I used to, it's funny too how your perspective changes. When I first started watching it, I'd be like, gosh, these people are so wealthy and they're so gorgeous and they're so whatever. And now so many of them have gone through so much stuff that I'm like, these poor women, like
A little less adoration, a little more. Oh my God,
it's
these people.
yeah, like I'd rather
Yeah.
be me, my middle class life than
Yeah.
dealing with some of the stuff they're dealing with.
Okay, so let's see. Just a favorite local getaway. Is there a place you like to
Oh
go?
my goodness. Well, I have friends. It's good to have friends that have a boat. So for a while, when I was younger and more carefree, would go out on Lake Lanier on someone's boat almost every weekend. Now I'm lucky if I get to go out a couple times a year. And then during the pandemic, when you kind of were, bored and isolated, we would just drive around and go to different areas around Georgia. So one day we went to Big Canoe, which I thought was totally awesome, and I'd love to go back. But yeah, I love to just see these parts of Georgia that I didn't really know about.
All right, and last question. Favorite non-work hobby?
Non-work hobby, as if there is such a thing.
No,
Um,
it's funny
I,
sometimes when I ask that question. People are like,
yeah.
what's not working?
I do word games. I like Wordle and all the Wordles, Wordle and Quordle and Octordle and all that. Um,
I didn't
I
know there
like,
was more than one.
oh my gosh. Yeah,
There's a
don't
lot of
even get
okay.
started.
Don't get me
Yeah,
started. Don't get me hooked on
yeah,
this.
they are addictive.
Thank you. All right, that's great. Okay, so we've been talking with Kathleen Conway, managing editor, George Trend Magazine, which you can find at. Oh, I just put down the. Let's see, I'm sure it's georgiatrend.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
georgiatrend.com, and I'll put the graphic in there too, and put it in the notes so everyone can find it. You can subscribe to the print edition. You can read it online. There's no excuse for not reading Georgia Trend every month because, it's easy. Thank you, Kathleen, and appreciate your taking some time with us.
Thank you.
And as always, come back in 2 weeks for the next edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. You can find our archive of 100 plus interviews online on YouTube, and the audio version is on Apple Podcasts and all the other places where you can find podcasts. And as always, if you want to subscribe to our database of Atlanta media, go to leftsatlantamedia.com, which also gets you our wonderful Mitch's Media Musings monthly newsletter, which has all kinds of fun, interesting info about Atlanta's journalist community. Thank you, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.